Chapter 17, Blockade at the Bridge. Johnny began working temporarily in Mr. Jameson's office. The pay was better than Johnny ever hoped to make. He could handle the work, but it was so different from the work to which he had become accustomed. Mr. Jameson's office sold parts from many different companies to many other companies, and there was much work by telephone and mail. The first few days were all training and kept his mind busy. Now some of the tasks began to seem repetitive and didn't require all of Johnny's thoughts, so he found his mind wandering. Today he kept thinking about Eliza Beth, remembering the day he first held her in his arms. She seemed so tiny he would have been afraid to hold her, had he not been even more terrified of the clan catching him. Johnny was unaware of the predicament Eliza Beth was in, or pressing on with the work would have been impossible. Widow Jackson needed to run some errands in Williamston and offered to give Mrs. Jameson a ride to surprise her husband. Stephen took lunch early to eat with Amelia. Mr. Jameson expected a call from an important client, so it was best to stagger the lunch times anyhow. By now the rest of the office went to lunch and Johnny waited for the call, which never came. "Good morning, Johnny," Amelia said as they returned from lunch. "How do you like the work so far?" Johnny responded with a good morning and answered, "It's good, but not really the sort of thing I prepared for, though." Mr. Jameson commented, "Maybe it'll grow on you. You never can tell. Any calls while we were out?" "No, sir. It has been rather slow since everyone left for lunch. I sure am hungry." "I'm sorry, Johnny," Mr. Jameson apologized. "I should have realized you'd be hungry by now. You can go take your sack lunch into the meeting room. I've got charge of the phones now." No sooner had Johnny closed the door and sat down to eat than the office phone rang. Stephen picked up the phone and was surprised to hear Mary Beth's voice on the other end, even before he had a chance to say hello. She talked fast and so loudly that even her mother recognized her voice from 3 feet away. "Whoa, hold on, Mary Beth," her father protested. "You know I can't catch a word when you're upset like this. Here's your mother." "Yes, dear, what's wrong?" her mother asked. "My goodness, are you absolutely certain about this?" Mary Beth got word about Eliza Beth and immediately called to tell Johnny. After getting all the details they could, Mary Beth got off the line. She was anxiously waiting for more information herself. Amelia hung up the phone and explained the situation to her husband. They were debating what they should tell Johnny, or if they should even tell him at all. Amelia said, "You know he'll want to know as soon as possible." "I know that, dear," Stephen responded, "but he really can't do anything about it except worry. We can tell him when we find out what happens." His wife raised one eyebrow and he understood immediately that this was an argument he wouldn't win. "I guess you're right. He has to be told, though it changes nothing. I suppose I'd be mad if something was happening with Mary Beth and no one let me know." Mrs. Jameson ended up being the one to inform Johnny. Part of him wanted to rush off, but he knew that would do no good. They might be headed anywhere. Johnny might just as soon run around in a circle chasing a tail he never had. Johnny thought about the very last thing Eliza Beth's father said to him. "Take care of her, boy." This is what bothered him ever since he moved out of the orphanage. He always felt the minute he obeyed the command to run with the baby, he committed himself to everything the father said. He felt as though he made a promise to take care of Eliza Beth himself. Johnny couldn't have done anything differently. He had to leave and Eliza Beth had to stay, for a time at least. He couldn't believe Miss Johnson was going to let someone else adopt Eliza without even telling him. Now Johnny understood how Eliza's father felt as he prayed, "Save my baby, save my girl." Miss Johnson and little Tom were still standing on the curb. Miss Johnson thought, if only little Tom had poked his head around the corner a moment sooner. If only I'd listened to that little nagging voice in my head. If only. She stopped abruptly. Such thoughts were not going to save poor Eliza Beth. The half-hearted group from Town's End, who totally disbanded without their leader, would have likely taken her to some black orphanage and dropped her off right at the curb. In the right home, it might have been the best thing in the world for her. With the clan doing the choosing, it would likely be the worst they could find. With Mayor Phillips at the helm, no doubt, it would have been the worst place he could find. Never trust the clan to do what's in the best interest of any child that doesn't meet their standards. The men from the Williamston group always took things more seriously, and the danger was more ominous. Just then, Mr. Samuels drove up with Pastor Stevens riding along. As the pastor got out of the car, he said, "By the looks of it, I'm guessing we've missed our chance to see Miss Eliza Beth off. How long ago?" Mr. Samuels came around the front of the car, and after seeing the expression of little Tom and Miss Johnson, he grabbed the pastor by the arm. Pastor Stevens stopped and realized immediately that something was dreadfully wrong. Miss Johnson was whiter than white, and it looked like she might faint, not from excitement but worry. She looked like a woman who just received the most terrible news of her entire life. Miss Johnson was speechless and obviously feeling ill, so the two men looked to little Tom for answers. "Gentlemen," little Tom sighed before continuing, "Eliza's gone, but as sure as I'm standing here, it's the clan that has her. Though I bet there's a different name on the papers, Chance Dwight just drove off with Eliza. He's clan from Williamston. I recognize him from them big meetings we had there. It's got to be his sister Clara that's in cahoots with him. That man's too mean. No woman would have him." Pastor Stevens helped Miss Johnson sit down on the curb. Mr. Samuels headed for the front door of the home. "We'd better get a hold of the chief pronto. I'll go make the call. You stay and take care of Miss Johnson." Mr. Samuels explained the situation to the dispatcher, who radioed the account to Chief Barton. Several people in the town owned radios to listen to the police and emergency channels, so word spread like wildfire. The chief was cruising nearby the home, so he arrived within a couple of minutes. As the police car screeched to a halt in front of the home, the men ran to talk with Chief Barton. By now, Jance had a 10-minute head start. "The only hope we have is that Jance isn't expecting any trouble and is driving along nice and easy. I'm sure they'll be heading for the county line at Deer Creek Bridge." "Jump in, little Tom," the chief began barking out orders. "You two fall in behind in your car. Stay with me if your car can take it. I'm not going to use the lights or siren unless there's heavy traffic. Don't want to tip off our pair. If they stop for me, go on past and block them in." "Got it. You go on. We'll catch up," Pastor Stevens said as the two headed for the other car. As Chief Barton sped off, Mr. Samuels thought catching up would be easier said than done. He knew his car better than the pastor did. But Mr. Samuels found his old car had more power than he thought. Chief Barton opened up the accelerator after rounding the corner onto Twillinger. He did turn on his siren until he got well past the city limits. They wouldn't catch their prey that quickly, and it was too dangerous for pedestrians to speed on without warning. Now, Mr. Samuel's car was hard-pressed to keep up and fell behind a little bit at each moment. The chief pressed on without slowing. He figured he at least ought to catch the fleeing Dwight car. Besides, Mr. Samuels knew the way. After leaving Town's End, Jance sped up a little bit. Not that he felt the least worried about being followed or caught. He didn't particularly like having Eliza Beth in his car, old and beat as it was. His sister had long since given up on being nice to Eliza because the act was wearing thin anyhow. Eliza began to suspect something was wrong even while Clara was still trying her best to seem nice. Every time something the woman said didn't sound quite right, Eliza thought of Miss Johnson's furrowed eyebrows. Finally, Eliza said, "I don't believe you want me for your daughter at all. What's going on? Where are you taking me? Please, I want to go back to the orphanage." At this, the act ended entirely. Clara Dwight took some cords out of her purse and began to struggle with Eliza, trying to bind her hands together. The woman was very strong and quickly bound Elizabeth's hands. Soon the woman was struggling with Eliza's feet. Eliza protested loudly. "Why, you're even meaner than that Mr. Phillips. Please, just take me back to my home. I ain't never done anything to you." As Jance was nearing the bridge, he exclaimed, "Hello? What's this?" "I declare there appears to be a roadblock just this side of the bridge." Clara just finished with Eliza's feet and began working on gagging the child's mouth to blot out her shrieks and screams of protest. Clara stopped to lean forward and look. "No, it's just some old panel truck in our lane stopped just this side of the bridge. Broken down, it seems. Look, I do believe it has a flat tire. Don't you see the little old woman standing beside it trying to work that jack? I think we should just whip on past." No, we can't do that. As sure as anything, we're likely to hit the old woman," Jance argued. "Even if we could make it through between her and the rail, it wouldn't seem proper and all. I think we'd best just stop and help her change her tire. No sense making ourselves out as though we might be up to no good. Ain't nobody going to come checking up on us anyhow." It was, in fact, a 1938 Ford panel truck. There was writing on the side that read, "Honest Jeb Jackson's Guns and Tackle. We buy and sell all makes and models. Best quality ammunition. Jance pulled up behind the old truck, leaving enough space to pull out quickly if necessary. Stepping out, he saw an old woman in a faded flower print dress. She was wearing a lace hat, Sunday best no doubt. She dressed herself up for a trip to town. She seems harmless enough, Jance thought. It'll be a quick job to change the tire. He didn't know the bolts on that particular tire hadn't been turned for nearly a decade. He found it necessary to kneel for better leverage. Jance was so busy that he didn't notice Chief Barton rapidly approaching. By the time he heard the roar of the police car's engine, Clara had climbed up to honk the horn. Immediately, Jance was on his feet, the chief already pulled up bumper to bumper. Mr. Samuel's car was just coming into view as Chief Barton was moving around his own open door and Jance was climbing into the driver's seat. Jance cut his wheels sharp as he attempted to drive around Widow Jackson's truck. As he pulled forward to the right, he found the good widow had dragged out the new tire in a toolbox. She strategically placed both items so that Jance had to stop and try to back up a little to clear them. In the meantime, Mr. Samuel swung wide onto the gravel shoulder to miss the front door of the Dwight car. He pulled sharp back onto the pavement and the rear of the vehicle skidded to the right in the loose gravel. The car came to a stop sideways across the road, totally blocking the bridge as a means of escape. Jance then cranked his wheels sharply the other direction to attempt to flee. There were other bridges and even other counties for that matter. Turning to check his clearance on his left, he found himself looking at the harmless old woman, as he called her, and right down the barrel of her .38 Special. "Sonny," the old woman said in a shaking voice, "my trigger finger ain't as steady as it once was. You might want to turn that there automobile off and pronto." Clara made a grab for Eliza Beth. A hostage could still get them out of their present difficulties. Suddenly, an enormous hand reached in the back window and grabbed her by the left wrist. She tried to escape the hand's grasp by pulling forward, but soon found a second enormous hand coming in the front window and grabbing her right wrist. Little Tom then pulled back hard, pinning the woman's back up against Eliza's luggage and completely unable to move. Pastor Stevens quickly scrambled to the driver's side passenger door and scooped Eliza Beth out. Clara tied the cord so tightly that Mr. Samuels needed to use his jackknife to free the terrified child. Chief Barton joined Widow Jackson at the driver's side door and took the keys that Jance handed out to him. The car was going nowhere and everyone took a moment to catch their breath. "Widow Jackson," the chief said, "have you been listening in on the police channel again? Now you know there's an ordinance against having one of those radios, with a police channel no less, in your vehicle." Widow Jackson, who still had Jance covered, replied, "What's that, Chief? I seem to have some wax in my ear. Could you repeat it a bit louder?" Chief Barton didn't repeat it, but only slapped his knee and exclaimed, "God bless you, woman. I do believe the sight of you on that there bridge was the most beautiful thing I've seen in a long time." He gave a hearty laugh before setting to work on pulling Jance out of the car. With help from little Tom, the two troublemakers were loaded into the back of the police car. Eliza was unbound and whimpering in Pastor Stevens' arms. She said nothing and eventually grew quiet. After all the panic, she was exhausted, but she didn't sleep. Mr. Samuels and the pastor left to take Eliza home. The chief stayed to help Widow Jackson load up her truck and pump her tire back up because she'd merely let the air out. Meanwhile, little Tom got Jance's car hooked up behind the old panel truck. The chief took Jance and Clara off to the police station. The widow followed behind with the impounded car in tow. She didn't mind. It made a good excuse for a slow, casual countryside drive. It brought back good memories of such drives with Jeb. Little Tom, who was left to steer Jance's car, thought the widow took it a bit too casual. The minute the pastor brought Eliza Beth in the house, Miss Johnson called Johnny. He was still at his workplace and still sitting in the meeting room praying. He smiled and laughed, which told Stephen and Amelia that things had turned around all right in the end. At Johnny's request, they put Eliza on the phone. She never spoke on the phone before, and being tired as well, she didn't have much to say. She listened to Johnny's voice, which sounded far off, but it was a welcome sound to her little ear. She was sitting in Miss Johnson's lap, listening, and dozed right off to sleep. The next morning, Eliza Beth remembered hearing, "Now you be a good girl and rest. I'll be coming to see you just as soon as I can arrange it. Eliza, are you still there?" She gave some small noise that passed for an answer of yes, and he continued, "Only one more thing, little Eliza Beth, I love you." With that, she dropped off into the most contented sleep. As she remembered all this, a hand was gently rocking her back and forth, and the same voice was saying, Eliza, Beth, it's 8 in the morning, child. You've been dead asleep for close to 12 hours. Time to get up. She opened her eyes to see Johnny at her side. Johnny spent most of the day with Eliza Beth and the other children, and for a while it began to seem that he'd never left and everything in between had only been some terrible dream. Soon enough, Johnny needed to leave. Far too soon in Eliza's opinion. She let him go without much fuss after he promised to come by to see her at least once a week. It occurred to Eliza Beth after Johnny left that she forgot to tell him that she loved him.